And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about European and East Asian empires that expand land based wise. So, from 1450 to 1750, we got empires that are going to expand by expanding their empire around the borders that they already reside in, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So let us begin. Okay, so in Western Europe, let's talk about a few things. So in 1750, that signals the end of the medieval period. So you remember the whole king, and then a lord, and then the knight, and then eventually the serfs at the bottom. That whole way of life goes away, and the medieval area period goes away as well. And we enter in something called the early modern period. Now, what did this bring? This bring a whole nother set of monarchs. So during this time period, we're going to have great and popular monarchs such as the Tudors of England, the Valois of France, and we'll have the famous Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain, who also financed Christopher Columbus to go west. We have governments that will become more centralized in their power. So remember, in the feudal system, the king would share their power with the lords in exchange for loyalty. Remember, land for loyalty? Well, that idea is going to go away because there are a lot of lords that strip the power from the king, and the king wants to have more power controlled around them so they can be more effectual as a leader. So governments became more centralized as power diminished from the lords and the church. As a result, the middle class will grow considerably. So that middle class, the peasants who were just sort of making it, they're going to start growing in larger numbers. And an example of this stripping of power from the lords will be the new monarchs. They diminish the ability for lords to have private armies. So if you're a lord or a noble, you couldn't even have a private army anymore. All the armies, were controlled by the king. You couldn't have that personal army control because that meant that you could somehow defend yourself in case you thought the king was being too tyrannical. Moreover, empires began to launch overseas explorations and establish colonies around the world. So there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening in the world right now, especially in Western Europe. Let's jump over to Russia. Remember, we're just talking about land-based expansion, increasing the borders of their empires. So, Russia always had a close tie with Europe. Even their capitals were located in the eastern part of Europe and not Asia. So even the capitals such as like St. Petersburg was still within like the eastern boundary of Europe, although close to the Asian. Moscow over here again was still in the eastern part of Europe, and so Kiev as well. So they always tried to maintain those close ties with Europe by having capitals that were closer to Europe, so they could keep those networks of exchange open, especially in the Baltic Sea region. However, strong Asian influence came during the Golden Horde. Remember, the Golden Horde came and conquered that region and ruled it remotely. And so we had a lot of Asian influence that kind of crept into to Russian society. And also to keep in mind that strong Viking influence also came to Russians through invasions and trade. So Russia is sort of a conglomerate of a lot of things. You got Asia, you got Vikings north in the far reaches, northern part of Europe, and then you have mainland Europe. And so these Russians kind of their way of life, their culture, their genetics all sort of reflect this conglomeration of different nationalities and cultures and races. So we have Ivan the Fourth, who is also known as Ivan the Terrible. So this man, he took control of Russia, and he fought the descendants of the Golden Horde. So the Golden Horde was sort of around, but it was more like all these other kingdoms that sort of popped up as a result, right? However, he fought against them, and he wins, and he centralizes the Russian government, where he and every other king ruler is to have that absolute power, if you will. He expanded east to control the fur trade of Siberia. So if you can see all this land of Siberia, which even part of the Golden Horde had control of, he wanted a piece of this land, and he also wanted to control the fur trade, which was a very powerful trade during that time, especially in the northern regions where it was cold. He incentivized wealthy landowners to expand east. He said, look, go east. Whatever land you conquer, you can have that land. That can be your land. When the empire engulfs more of the land, I will make sure that you are rewarded for such heroicism. So these wealthy landowners are looking to expand their own power and prestige. They start using peasant warriors that they're paying, called Cossacks, to fight the local tribes and, of course, the Siberian Khan, which is this massive region right here. Okay, all the gray region here. And so we got this Cossack social class that sort of emerges to become the fighters for the expansion eastward for the Russian Empire. Now, Russia gained control of the Volga River, and the Volga River, as you can see right here, the Volga River, it kind of dumps into the Caspian Sea, which opens up for trade with the Ottoman and Persia and regions round about there. And so they gain control of the Volga River, and now they have trade from Moscow all the way to the Ottomans and the Persians via waterway, which makes it very powerful as a network of trade for the Russians. Um, Also, Ivan the Fourth sent Greek Orthodox missionaries to go convert and spread Christianity to the people who he conquered, who were typically Muslim. And so now he's conquering the land, and he's converting them to their state religion, which is Orthodox Christianity, or Greek Orthodox. See. And by 1639, Russia had conquered from all the way from here in the eastern part of Europe, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Uh, and they're going to control that fur trade, and they will also establish a Siberia-Alaska connection, and also have some commerce down all the way to California in North America. So Russia is really expanding their power, their strength, and their prestige during this time period. And as you can see, all the different times in the timeline of history where they expand their power, most of which is here, 1533 to 1689, where they conquer the Siberia Khanate. So we have the Ming Dynasty overthrew the Yuan Dynasty. Now Zheng He during the Ming Dynasty does extensive exploration in the Indian Ocean. Afterward, the Portuguese and other Europeans arrive in the Indian Ocean and just dominate the trade uh, because of the Ming, who kind of pulled back from the Indian Ocean trade. The Ming, for some reason, after Zheng He did many explorations, they just they just became isolationist. They didn't want to go out and make the effort to reach out to other lands. They thought all the lands would reach out to them because they're China. Um, and so that became a downfall, because just as the Ming Dynasty is reclusing themselves and becoming isolationists within the Indian Ocean, that allowed a power vacuum for the newly arrived Portuguese to sort of take control of those regions through intimidation, domination, superior technology, etc. And so the Portuguese will dominate the Indian Ocean for quite some time until the British and the Dutch seize power from them economically. So the we have in the Ming, they restored and expanded the Great Wall to keep northern enemies out. So remember, during the Yuan Dynasty, the Great Wall isn't really an issue. They're not concerned about the Great Wall because the Great Wall, it was to keep the northern pastoralist tribes out of China. Well, the Mongolians are from the northern part, early, high above the north of China. And so they're like, we don't care. Come through the wall. We've conquered China now. However, the Ming have now kicked out the Yuan and the Mongolians, and so they want to reestablish that wall again, and they're going to restore it and they're going to expand it. And the Great Wall that the Ming Dynasty refurbishes is the same wall that you see today. So if you've ever gone to China or seen it via, video or whatever, that's the Great Wall that the Ming Dynasty restored. And not a lot has been done to it since then. I'm sure they've kept it up and tried to keep it as nice as they can today because it's a great tourist attraction and a great part of their history. Also, the creation of the elite Forbidden City was built during the Ming Dynasty, and that can be found in modern day Beijing. So there's this massive city where the emperor lived, and and it was only elites that could kind of walk in that city. And if you were a peasant and you weren't allowed to be in that city, and there could be quite the punishment for that. So it was this beautiful, amazing city, but it was called the Forbidden City because not everyone could go to it. So by 1644, the Manchu seized power. The Manchu are the people in the northern eastern part of China called Manchuria. They conquered the Ming and they established what's called the Qing Dynasty, and they will rule till 1911. And the Qing Dynasty, we got some emperors that are worth mentioning. We have Emperor Keijing and Kangxing, yes, expanded empire into Mongolia, Taiwan, Central Asia. So the Qing is expanding their borders. Also, they imposed a protectorate over Tibet, which China still controls today. So they control Tibet as well, which China still believes they should be able to control today. Now, Emperor Qing Long, okay, Qian Long, he conquers the Muslim Uyghurs that are in Central Asia. And this is a problem because he's conquering a group of people that aren't Neo Confucianists, aren't Buddhists, they are Muslims. And so that can create a problem, which it will. Uh, Also, he installed the Dalai Lama on the throne in Tibet and conquered the Nepalese. Nepalese are the people of Nepal that are somewhat northeast of India. Um, he, Emperor Qianlong was unable to conquer Burma and Vietnam, depleting the empire's treasury. Limited British. He tried to limit the British as to one city that port city that on in China that they could trade in. The city was called Canton, and the British were not very happy with that. They wanted to have more access to China, but Emperor Qianlong kind of understood that the British were a threat to China, and although he was benefiting by trading with them economically, he knew that they were a force to be reckoned with, and so should be limited. Um, Towards the end of the rule, he starts levying high taxes. Things aren't going as good as they ought to in Qing Dynasty. There are rebellions that spark. One of the most namely rebellion is the White Lotus Rebellion that happens between 1796 1804, and the emperor in that rebellion kills 100,000 peasants to try to put it down, which I'd have to say he successfully does to a degree. The White Lotus, if you remember, the White Lotus was a rebellion that began against the Yuan Dynasty, and now the White Lotus will be a rebellion against the Qing Dynasty, wanting to bring back the Ming Dynasty. And that's pretty much it for empires expanding that we're going to talk about today. Go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll go ahead and talk about this when we get back. Thanks. Bye.